You take your thinking from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. Because what a journal does is when we're in our heads, we're having this discussion in our own heads with ourselves, right? And that's that kind of that 2-dimensional thinking. But when you write down your thoughts on paper, your frustrations or ideas, now you've got this narrative that you've had in your head, but it's on paper. So you've got this third angle that you get to look at it. So it's, kind of a funny way to say it, but 3-dimensional thinking when it comes to journaling. So I urge people to do that. It makes a huge difference.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the People Powered Solutions podcast. Today, our guest, Kyle Gillette, is going to enlighten us on his theories around leadership and provide some very actionable tips, tricks, and strategies to improve on your leadership and to leverage accountability to help improve your team and your overall organization. Welcome to our show, Kyle.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
So, Kyle, how about you start us off by giving us and our listeners a bit of an idea of how Kyle came to do what Kyle does?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up on an orange farm in the Central Valley of California. So the blue collar world is kind of my origin, which is part of the reason why my business is called Blue Shirt Coaching. After growing up there, I ended up going to Cal Poly, which some people may know of Cal Poly, some people may not, but went there and then got introduced to a men's mentoring program. And I was asked to live in this house with guys that are 18 to 25 years old. They're off track, stuck in life. The thing was, I was too. So they were asking me to help these guys. I'm 22 years old and I'm supposed to help these guys that are off track in life get their lives on track. So bravely and maybe stupidly, I said, yes, I'll live in this house. And so I did that and ended up living there for a year and then being part of the program for 9.5 years. And the whole time I was there, there's a gentleman by the name of Jack that mentored me. So I got the wonderful mentorship of my dad growing up, and then this gentleman during the program. And every Tuesday, he would mentor me. And we would have lunch together, hour-and-a-half long lunch. And he was a serial entrepreneur, multimillionaire that retired in his early 50s and started this program and then hasn't been paid a dime since. And he's just run it. And he just poured his wisdom into me and the other people in the program. What was beautiful was I had the opportunity to take that experience and then immediately apply it to a business that we ran, which was a pet resort that supported the program, and then eventually to be the director of the program. So I got that perfect experience of taking the wisdom, then apply it, screw up, apply it again, and keep on going.
I'm pausing there. What's a pet resort?
Yes. So
pets, and suddenly they're wondering as well, what? We can be going on a vacation somewhere? Tell me more.
Yeah, so the pet resort there was this facility that had 43 outbuildings that were 8x8 cottages. And the cottages were concrete floors, and we had beds in there, heated beds and backyards. And then the dogs played all day off leash. And so we'd house somewhere between 90 to 100 dogs every night. And then we'd have 50 to 60 dogs in daycare every day. And so that was really lucrative and supported the program, plus tons of employees, and you talk about a happy place to work. So it was
wow. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I totally threw you off track there, but awesome. So what I'm hearing is you were provided this opportunity to be mentored, and then the venture to try your hand at entrepreneurship safely, in that when you were not as successful or something happened, encountered a challenge, you had that safety and the further guidance and support to continue just tweaking it until it was something that worked well.
Yeah, I always had that blue mat underneath me. So if I fell, it wasn't near as painful. It was scary when I fell, but it wasn't near as painful. Once I started my own business, it's a whole different story. But it was during that time, it was a wonderful experience and learned a lot of lessons, made some mistakes, that's for sure. But it was really good experience.
Awesome. So what made you decide to do your own thing?
Yeah, kids and wife was a big pivot point for us. My wife has family up in the Pacific Northwest, and my family's in the Central Valley of California, and we needed to make a choice. Wanted to raise our kids by grandparents. And I didn't want to become a farmer. I had done that work since I was in 7th grade. And I'm like, this isn't for me. I don't want to do this. And so I moved up with my family up here to kind of the unknown of what it was going to be. But my promise to myself was I want to serve people and make an impact like I was in the ministry and men's mentoring program up here in the Pacific Northwest. And so I could not figure out how to do that for the first several years of living here, but eventually figured it out. And now I'm running Blue Shirt Coaching. So that was a fun venture and some failed businesses in the process too.
Well, I think that if anything, and it's funny because I think my post on social media today was about failing forward and understanding that there are no mistakes ultimately, right? That you either grow, you learn, there's no mistakes, there's just lessons at the end of the day. So you decided to start this coaching business. We do know that there's a variety of coaches out there. There's different, they delve in different niches, if you will. What is your sweet spot? So who do you normally work with and what kind of coaching do you provide?
Yeah, frequently I'm working with men that are Christian business owners. So I'm helping them with their business to be successful in their business, but also to help them with their life. And the way I talk about it is a lot of people that I work with are in a state of SOS. And what I mean by that is they feel like they're on an island. And if you picture that deserted island and you look down from above and the guy's dragging out SOS in the sand, help, help, help. And a lot of men are afraid to ask for help. But the SOS is that they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, and they're stuck. And there's plenty of people out there that are in that state. And my job is to help them get out of that state, to be successful both in business and at home, and to create that balance that they want.
I was going to say, I love that you work with both fronts, because if there's an imbalance in either,
Yep.
it will have a ripple effect in the other, right? So great that you're able to help them strike that balance and find that equilibrium, if you will, within both of those different spheres. In doing some research for the show, I heard or read somewhere that you had the secret to empowering others. And how can you leverage that empowerment just to grow in general? So would you mind sharing with our listeners a bit more about what that secret's about and just insight on how to empower each other?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing is you have to assume that everyone you interact with, especially those that work for you, work with you, are fascinating. If you assume that their life story, that they as a person, they're absolutely fascinating, then this creates a different interaction with them. There's a whole different level of trust interaction that they have with you and that you have with them. Because if I assume, Lori, that you are absolutely fascinating, you have amazing talents and abilities and skills, and you're worth spending time with and drawing that out of, then I'm going to put a lot more effort into doing that. But if I assume that I've got the answers and that you're just another person in my life and, I'm the main character, then I'm not going to be able to empower you like I could. Right. So that's step one.
Step one, I'm stopping you there.
Yeah.
Just because I feel the need to even just +1 on that because I 100% agree. And it's about listening to understand rather than listening to respond, right? And
Correct.
to be curious and approach every conversation with curiosity. But what I also heard from you is to suspend judgment. I have a rule when I'm giving any workshops or trainings or sessions, and I say in my shared commitments, because I don't do ground rules, I do shared commitments at the onset of the session. And I always say, commit to loving it for 1 minute. And then people are like, what do you even mean? And I say, well, here's what I mean is that we often come into these sessions with some preconceived notions. And when you're listening and suddenly you're quick to discount and to say, nah, that's not at all what it is. Like, no, I don't believe that. I need you to listen to everything we're going to talk about today and to pretend it's the first time you've ever heard it and to pretend that it is absolutely the most amazing thing you've ever heard. And then just to suspend all judgment and to give it a chance, sit with it. If at the end of a minute, honestly, sometimes it takes more than a minute, but if at the end you're like, no, I'm still feeling like this is just not aligned with my thoughts, that's fine. That's 100%. You can do that. But initially, to approach this whole session and to set that mindset that you're loving this. Everything I'm saying is so incredible. And I always joke that, because that makes me feel better as a facilitator, that it makes me feel really like I've got all these amazing things to say. But really, it's about them suspending judgment and giving it a chance. And I found this over time in my former career, my former life, where I come into a meeting, already have decided that, when this person speaks, I don't want to hear it. When that person speaks, I'm sure she's just going to go there again, right? I was listening at about 10%, if you think about the real active listening. When I chose to adopt that approach, that pretend to love it for 1 minute approach, suddenly my mind opened up and there was space to entertain alternate viewpoints. And there was space to recognize and value these diverse perspectives and to improve my own approach to whatever the case may be, based on what I had now suddenly heard and was open to absorbing, right? So just a lot of parallels there in terms of listening to the other person and starting with the assumption and operating from the perspective of this person's amazing, has so much to offer, can't wait to learn more about them. Sorry, that was my little segue, but it's just because I really loved what you were saying and I felt the need to share this additional insight with listeners.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I totally agree. It's setting your unconscious mind to automatically go, I'm going to get something out of this. I'm going to learn something from this person. I'm going to get something from this workshop. I'm going to get something from this coaching session, this conversation. And so then automatically you do. Our brain can only, what's the number? 122, I think is the number. If every second there's a million bits of information falling, and you picture it's a bunch of toothpicks falling, you can only handle 122 at a time. So you get to choose how many you grab and which ones you grab. So if I choose that I'm going to have a good experience and I'm going to learn something from this person, those are the bits of information I'm going to grab. If I choose that this person's a jerk and they don't know what the heck they're talking about, that's what I'm going to grab. I'm going to be annoyed at the clothes they're wearing or the way that they speak or whatever. Yeah. So setting the intention is really huge, and their unconscious mind does the rest of the work for us in really amazing and powerful ways. So set the intention that the person is fascinating is that first step. Step number 2 is you study them. A lot of people, if you're going to empower someone, you need to know how they're wired. So as a behavioral analyst with DISC and another couple other tools.
I did not know you were DISC. Sorry, I love DISC.
Oh, yeah.
I'm licensed partner with them. Sorry. I'm excited even more because I love DISC as well.
It's wonderful. And it's like the cheat code to get to know somebody quickly.
Yes.
And it's the way that you get to learn how to treat people the way they want to be treated. And that makes a huge difference. So I studied them. And when you do that, all of a sudden your ability to empower them changes. And one of the things I challenge people with is when you're thinking about your spouse, for example, what kind of a communicator are they? And do they communicate visually? Do they communicate audibly? Do they communicate kinesthetically? How do they communicate? And if you don't know that, that's not okay. Do something about it. Learn how they communicate. Same with your kids, same with everybody that works for you. Because when you learn that, now when you're having conversations with them, you can pivot and adjust the way you communicate so it actually gets through.
So it's actually landing with them. But also, correct. If you're not taking the time to understand that, you're probably missing large portions of information in that conversation, be it nonverbal, be it because you fail to take the time to decode what their preference and needs are.
Yep. 100%. And if you want really, really practical here, what you can do is simply slow down, right? Slow down and be willing to be quiet. I have an acronym for listening that I call it the wiser way to listen. And it's WISER, and every one of those stands for a certain word. But one of the things I suggest people to do is to be okay with an 8-second pause, an 8-second moment of silence in a conversation where you don't have to run people over, which brings me to the third step when it comes to empowering people. So the first is believe they're fascinating. The second is study them. And the third is to not interrupt. To leave the promise and keep the promise that you won't interrupt people. And what does that mean? It's not just speaking, right? So if you're in the middle of a sentence, Lori, and I interrupt you, that's clearly an interruption, and that's interrupting your thought. That's the key part here is when it comes to empowering people, what we don't want to do is interrupt their thoughts, because empowering someone's conscious mind is fine. That's good. They can be thinking about what they're trying to do, but truly empowering their unconscious mind is the real goal here, because that's where the gold, the innovation, the creativity, the out of the box thinking is. That's where that is. And that's where they want to be anyway, because that's so rewarding to truly and fully think. So don't interrupt with words, but also don't interrupt with your gestures. Don't interrupt with the way that you present yourself to them. Hold a space for them where they can truly be heard, and then shut the heck up.
Which I'm feeling a little guilty because I kind of interjected here and there, which now I'm suddenly feeling very guilty about. But are you feeling a little less empowered because I had these additions to add?
No, different context, right? In some conversations, it's like we're just bantering and it's fun. In other conversations, when you're really trying to draw and empower somebody, it's a whole different thing. And it requires a lot of quietness or silence is one of the things that I talk about. And that silence is not just silence in words, it's silence of the thoughts that you want to share back. It's silence in the way that your body is expressing itself. It's just mellowing out and being fully present and listening, right? If you do those three things, now you know exactly how you can empower that person, and more likely they're already empowered. And that's the beauty of it.
That is so simple, but I can see how powerful and game-changing it can be. And in your silence piece too, in being cognizant, you said, of silencing your own mind chatter to be fully present in that moment, super important. Also let's bring it down to very basic, don't pick up your phone, shut down, especially if it's a more sensitive conversation. Shut your computer down. Don't be on your phone. Don't be, taking other things. Give them the benefit of eye contact so they know that you're fully present. And I can tell you're in coaching because one of the things that I had discomfort with in my first few coaching sessions years ago was the silence. I felt like, wow, have they not interpreted what I just asked? Maybe I need to ask it a different way. Maybe I need to add some things. But then I realized that in those silent moments is where the biggest aha moments came from my coachee, the client. And so I embraced early on to let the silence do that heavy lifting, because in that silence is normally where those greatest revelations arise.
Yep. And what's really powerful about this is you can use this in your home. So if you have some kids that are a little bit younger or even older, really, what my wife and I tried it, we'd probably do it 3 days a week. So we wanted to do it 7 days, but it's not happening. So we probably do it 3 days.
Manage expectations accordingly. Yes.
Exactly. So we've adjusted. But what we do is we sit together on the couch for 15 minutes and just talk, deeply talk, meaningful conversation. The catch is, obviously there's no distractions, there's no devices, no TV, none of that stuff. But the kids are in the room with us. And they are kind of on the side doing their own thing, and they need to be fairly quiet. They can be talking and doing their own thing, but they need to be fairly quiet. So they hear what we're saying. And sometimes we're talking about them. Sometimes we're talking about business or life or whatever. But studies show that 15-minute of interaction with the spouses together creates a calmness and de-stresses the children in huge ways. So this isn't a business tip, but it's definitely a personal side tip.
It can be. Sorry, I beg to differ on that one.
Okay, let's hear it. I love it.
And just as a +1, which I learned this term from a guest I was interviewing yesterday. He's like, instead of and you can just say, I'm going to +1, meaning I'm going to supplement. That was amazing. Not +1 like I'm going to go over, but more, let's just add to that because it's awesome. And I just want to add a bit more. So I'm hearing model the talk, right? So by having those 15 minutes, the kids are just organically seeing that this is healthy conversation. This is how you do active listening. This is what it looks like. So that's amazing. But to my point about how it translates to the labor market and to the workforce is, as a leader, have some conversations, open conversations with other leaders, with other team members, in front of others, to show what healthy conversation and healthy communication looks like, and what active listening, the intent on showing and purposeful on showing what active listening looks like, and taking the time to map out. If we were to apply your whole methodology of empowerment, it translates directly in the workforce, right? To, as a leader, take the time to understand your team members, listen with intent, assume that they are amazing, and your job as a leader is to help them recognize it and hold up a mirror for them so they start to recognize that amazingness, but then support and coach them into gaining the confidence to fully stepping into that potential, right? So I'm absolutely loving everything you're talking about here, Kyle. I think we do speak a very similar language. And a lot of what happens, it comes back to that equilibrium we talked about earlier. A lot of these things, they translate from one sphere to the next. So if you learn something and grow a skill or an ability in one sphere, take some time to figure out how can I use this and leverage it in that other sphere, in that work sphere, or vice versa, right?
100%.
Yes, absolutely. Before I get into accountability, which is what we promised our listeners at the onset of the show, anything else you want to talk about in terms of empowering others?
Celebrate.
Oh, I love it.
Celebrate the little things. One of the things that is really good to do is yes, you celebrate. Somebody does something good, tell them great job, catch them doing something good, all that type, but then find out how they went about doing it. So I saw that this project worked out great, that you won business for us. Really appreciate that. Great job. How did you go about doing that? How are you so successful in doing that? I would love to learn from you. That is extremely empowering for them. And of course, that translates into the home too. You get this beautiful little drawing, or they get an A on a test or whatever. And you say, one of my daughter's name is Annalise. Annalise, how did you get the A on that test? What did you do to be so successful and get an A on that test? How did you go about that? That is more rewarding than going, good job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of flattery, the one way. The other way is they're going to learn from themselves as a result of you asking those questions.
Yes. And it helps them recognize the effort they put in, which they may have discounted or aren't even able to recognize, right? So from a recognition standpoint, both at home and at work, that simple next question of, hey, tell me more about like how you got there. Like, what do you think contributed to this success?
Yep.
And helping them explore that a bit more. Love that. Love that. So celebrate and make sure that you add that question to help them recognize what led to that success. Extremely empowering approach for sure. The next thing I'd love for us to chat about is accountability from a leadership perspective, from a personal perspective, from a business perspective. You referenced 3 levels of accountability in some of the stuff that I found in my research. Can you tell us a bit more what those 3 levels of accountability are and why they're important?
Yeah, so let me frame it up with what B.L.U.E stands for, first of all, and then I'll dive into the accountability pass is something that I use. So if you've been hearing what I've been saying, I love acronyms. And so I mentioned the WISER acronym. B.L.U.E is an acronym in and of itself. And then I'm going to talk about accountability as PASS, which is an acronym too. Okay. So if you don't like acronyms, because I know not everybody does, I apologize, but it's the way I remember things and don't have to like have note cards or something.
No apologies. I like acronyms. They help me remember. Personally, I'm an analogy girl. Throughout my book, I'm using analogies, and I love plants, in case you hadn't picked up on that from what's going on in the back seat.
Yes.
Just listening, I have a ton of plants in the back of me. And so I use a lot of plant analogies, so much so that towards the end of my book, I said something along the lines of, I promise this is the last plant analogy. And then I start with a different analogy and I say, aren't you glad that wasn't another plant analogy? I'm aware, I'm very self-aware that I use a lot of analogies. And if you're using acronyms, well, I love them because they do help me remember. So how about we talk about B.L.U.E and then PASS?
For sure. So if I want you to imagine a leadership house, it's whatever house you have in mind, imagine that house. And B.L.U.E is the way that I describe leadership. So B stands for be a self-aware leader. And self-awareness is the foundation of your leadership house. If you don't have self-awareness, you cannot build leadership at all. You have to start there. So be a self-aware leader. Then the L in B.L.U.E is lead with accountability. So accountability is the nails that holds that leadership house together. And if you don't have accountability, we all know what happens when organizations or people don't have good accountability. And I'm not necessarily talking about ethics. Yes, that is true. But I'm just talking about following through on the promises you make to the customers you're serving or to the employees that you've hired. That type of accountability, if you don't have that, then the house crumbles. It hurts you, and more importantly, it hurts other people in the process. So then use a growth mindset, and the growth is the walls and the roof of your leadership house. The way I like to use the walls and the roof is because if you've been in your home long enough, You make adjustments, you move furniture, you knock out walls. When we first moved into this home, we had to rip out all the carpet, all the flooring, rip out the master bathroom and redo it. That's how leadership is sometimes. You have to rip out stuff and replace it with better leadership. Mm-hmm. And it's also, there's times when you actually put an addition onto your home because you're growing as a family, or you're growing in what you want to do with your home. The same thing as with leadership. You grow and it becomes larger and your influence increases as well. Then lastly, E, empower others. And that's the windows and doors. When you empower other people, the windows represent the ability for people to see into your leadership and go, wow, that's really amazing what Lori's doing. I want a part of that. I want to participate. I want to experience that. And so then they walk into that door. But it's the other way too, where the door is always open. So people, they are looking out the window and they see an opportunity for themselves. And a true blue shirt leader goes, that's awesome. I really want you to go, Lori, and go after what you have for your business, for your leadership. And they encourage them to go out the door. True empowerment, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the blue leadership model. To pass. Okay. How much time do I have? Because I can make it, I could stretch it or I could shrink it.
We've got about another 10 minutes.
Okay. I will try to do this in 5 minutes. So the pass is 4 things: passive, active, structures, and self. Passive, active, structures, self. So passive accountability is the idea that I have a goal. I have something I want to accomplish. And so I tell a bunch of people. I tell 10, 15, 20, 30 people about my goal. For instance, the first book I wrote, I was like, I'm going to write a book. I told my wife, I want to write a book. And so I started writing it. And then I told several friends. And then I told other family members and more friends and more friends. What happens is those people go, hey, what's going on with that book you want to write? And they check in on you. Not all of them by any means, but some of them do. And that creates some passive accountability. The second part of passive accountability is telling your brain, this is what it's going to look like to have succeeded. And you do that by writing a beautiful narrative, a creative narrative around exactly what it sounds like, looks like, feels like, and tastes like even when you've completed that particular goal. So when you get the first hardcover version of the book that you have, what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? And how do you feel? Where are you when that happens? When you create that picture, your unconscious mind doesn't know the difference between that reality that you've created and the reality that it really is in. And so now it has to make the reality that you created go into existence. Right? So kind of going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation with engaging your unconscious mind. So that's passive accountability. Active accountability would be you've reached out to all those people, and a couple people, 10% usually, will follow up with you. Tell 30 people, 3 follow up, and you know that 2 of those 3 aren't going to be good accountability partners. So you reach out to Susie and you say, hey, Susie, I've got this goal to write a book, and I'd love to support you in your goals. Can we meet weekly or bi-weekly to talk about what you're trying to accomplish and what I'm trying to accomplish, and kick each other in the butt when we're not doing well and celebrate the progress that we make? That's active accountability because there's a lot more effort put into it by you and the person that you're requesting. Then you get to structures. So structures are the plan, essentially, the plan of how to accomplish the goal or how to get the habit dialed in. So that would be, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I'll just share the 2 kind of major categories: calendar and to-do list, right? So your calendar, let me start with to-do list. The to-do list is the things that you need to accomplish in order to make this goal happen. And you just have a list of things you need to accomplish, right? So that real simple, right? We all know how to do that. Then the calendar is the people you need to interact with in order to accomplish your goal. And I intentionally divide up what I'm trying to do into those 2 software tools in those 2 categories. Now, of course, there is some overlap. You might block out some time and put some tasks on your calendar, and you might have some people stuff on your to-do list. But the reason I make them different is when I'm focused on my to-do list actions, I'm thinking about things, and my brain is operating different than when I'm focused on my calendar actions or items, which are people, which I need to be fascinated by and be thinking about, what have I studied? What do I know about this person? So it's a different engagement with your brain. And so when you structure your goals that way and create accountability for yourself that way, it's really powerful. Lastly is the second S, which is self-accountability. Most important piece, right? You got the passive, the active, and the self. Those are the kind of the levels to it. But the self is what you have to have. And the metaphor I like to use is jumping out of an airplane. Lori, have you ever jumped out of an airplane or bungee jumped or zip lined?
No. I'm terrified of
Okay.
heights. So I
Okay.
would actually even gander that the likelihood of that ever becoming a thing with me is about zero, zilch, nothing.
Okay. So for those of us that have jumped out of an airplane or zip lined, this will make a lot of sense. It'll make sense to you too, Lori. When you decide to jump out of an airplane or get off the platform to zip line, you've made a decision. You've decided to do something. But when you get to altitude and you're about to jump out at 10,000 feet, you've decided you're going to do it. But then let's say your stomach starts to hurt or you get terrified and you don't want to do it. So then now you're telling the jump master, you're going, I feel terrible. I can't do this. I'm not going to do it. But you already decided that you were going to do it. What's happened is there's a difference between deciding and committing. So with self-accountability, it's all about that commitment. When you commit, the commitment is when you fall out of that airplane, there is no way you're crawling back in. It's over. You're falling out of the sky and you're not getting back in. So whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, Lori, and I'm trying to accomplish, and listeners are, what is that point of no return? You cannot get back into that airplane. It's over. And we need to do that if we really want to.
Permission not granted. Yeah. Permission not granted. Permission not granted. You do not get to renege on this.
Exactly.
And what is that point of no return? Yeah.
Yep. So that's accountability pass. And it's something that you can really dial in fairly quickly. And then obviously there's a lot of follow through to it, but you can dial it in very quickly. And then the likelihood of accomplishing your goals is really all the way up to 98% when you deploy all those components.
I love that. I really like the passive, it is funny because I myself could identify inflection points in my life where I engaged the passive, the active, the self. So it's really interesting. I've never heard it put together and packaged that way. But now that you explain it, it's really helpful. And I'm hoping it's helpful for listeners as well to see maybe where there may be opportunity to increase a certain category of accountability, right? Maybe you're great with the self accountability, but you haven't really enlisted some accountability partners in the past. You haven't told people. And what is it they say about a goal? If it's just a thought, first if it's a goal is if you're just thinking about it, it's a thought. But if you write it down, becomes, that much more likely to transpire. But if you tell someone about it and write it down, then it's happening. Yep. You're going to be that much more committed to your point of commitment, committed to actually following through on it and making it a reality. So thank you. Thank you for all of this. My God, I liked it. I liked everything from start to finish, reference to empowerment and understanding how to do that effectively. Any leader can adopt some of these strategies that you've mentioned. Any parent, any friend can adopt some of these strategies if they see one of their employees or one of their friends or one of their children or spouse, peers, whatever the case may be, is dipping confidence-wise, and you want to help them and you want to figure out a way to help them build up that confidence, or as I mentioned earlier, you want to hold up that mirror for them to see their potential. I think some of the strategies you talked about are very applicable and you're able to action them immediately as a how-to. I find so many of these theories out there or different articles on, he'll talk about the importance of something, of empowerment, the importance of accountability, but how does that actually operationalize? How do I take this information and then translate it into action? And you, Kyle, today have offered nuggets and nuggets of wisdom. But before we sign off, I would love for you to, if there was one thing you could leave our listeners with, one tip, strategy, nugget of wisdom, words to live by, what would that be?
I shared something on the last podcast I was on that just came out of nowhere, and it was pretty valuable, but I can't remember what it was.
You should have taken notes.
I'm taking notes. I'll have to listen to it. No, but I would say one of the things that we didn't touch on that is part of the self-awareness, because in my book, I talk about the mindsets and habits of the 4 pillars that I mentioned that build the leadership house. And one of the main pieces to creating self-awareness is journaling. So I would encourage listeners, even for the men out there that are listening, they're like, I'm not going to write no sissy diary. Shut up. Write a freaking journal. It makes a difference. It's huge, the difference it makes when you take You take your thinking from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. Because what a journal does is when we're in our heads, we're having this discussion in our own heads with ourselves, right? And that's that kind of that 2-dimensional thinking. But when you write down your thoughts on paper, your frustrations or ideas, now you've got this narrative that you've had in your head, but it's on paper. So you've got this third angle that you get to look at it. So it's, kind of a funny way to say it, but 3-dimensional thinking when it comes to journaling. So I urge people to do that. It makes a huge difference.
I agree. It adds that third perspective. Although all 3 perspectives are you, to write things out sometimes, you're viewing the same challenge, issue, situation from a different angle. And that in and of itself will often lead to some revelations. Thank you. If people want to continue connecting with you or want to know more or even want to engage with you to provide them some coaching and some services, how can they continue to connect?
Yeah, go to blueshirtcoaching.com. You can do a free consultation with me, and then you can go to Facebook and go to the Blue Shirt business community. And I've got a community of business owners and professionals on there that are communicating, collaborating, all that world.
Amazing. Incredible. Thank you, Kyle. This was so informative, and we're going to make sure to add all the acronyms in the show notes, folks, for those who might have been in their cars and they're not able to take notes. Let's add those acronyms in there with it, as well as a summary of all these tidbits of wisdom that Kyle imparted. So I now challenge you to think about the podcast you just heard about these nuggets of wisdom that were provided, and think about how you could use those nuggets to power up your people-powered solutions. You've been listening to People-Powered Solutions. We'll see you here next week, folks. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guests, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.